are here to talk about a topic that Everett and I have talked about a lot these last few months, and about the importance of relationships and what we've observed and what we've learned and our viewpoints. So let me start by the disclaimer to say that we are by no means relationship experts, but we are very observant, and we have had these open conversations a lot in the last few months. Through the certification program we went through, we are both nurturers first, which means that we value relationships more. Relationships is what drives us. Authentic relationships is what drives us, and a lot of the things that we do in all areas of our lives. And so we're going to talk about different types of relationships here. But tonight we are going to start with what I think we've observed the most is probably in romantic relationships, and what we've seen and our experiences and the people around us, what has worked and what hasn't, and realizing how important it is to have not only an understanding of your partner and who they are and what their values are, but also to be emotionally intelligent and to be able to be aware of meeting in the middle, right? To work together and to make that relationship work. Also your spiritual intelligence too. So being aware of how you come across and how you can be with someone else, and all of the lovely tips and guidance that we have received in the last few months from what we've learned and the people that we've associated with, and how we can correlate that to everyone here. And we know with COVID, there's a lot of relationships struggling right now. You guys are spending a whole lot of time together. And it's something that you haven't quite, if you haven't quite figured out what makes you work, being in such close quarters and spending so much time together is probably driving you apart. So hopefully some of the things that we have learned will help you as well. And I think I've covered everything we're going to talk about.
Yeah, no, that was excellent. Just to sort of like to give it more of a background, I guess, this is going to be the first of a series of 3 discussions that we're going to have. So tonight we're focusing on romantic partnerships. In our next session, next week, we're going to talk about friends and families and how those relationships play out, and how, and then the last one will be a professional or coworkers, colleagues and so forth. And we're looking at this through the lens of bank, how we see it and how we now, our perceptions have changed. I know my perceptions of relationships have, taken a fundamental change thanks to bank, and so so for those of you who aren't familiar with bank, there's 2 really important concepts within bank. There's the personality type, and bank actually spells out the 4 personality types. So you've got your blueprint, you've got your action, and you've got your nurture, and you've got your knowledge. Those are the 4 types, and you'll see on the screen, Julie and my bank codes are the same. We're nurture first, knowledge second, action, and then blueprint. And that's significant in the order in which those types appear within your profile have certain meaning. So for us, for example, as nurturers first, relationships and authenticity is important to us. For someone who is knowledge, they're into learning, they're into intelligence, they're into understanding, intellect. For action values, we've got freedom, we've got flexibility as kind of the dynamic action person. And then for the blueprint, it's really somebody who appreciates stability and structure and predictability within their life. So those are the 4 types. And then on top of all that, we have the bank intelligence operating systems. And today for relationships, we're going to be talking about personality intelligence, we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence, and we're going to be talking about spiritual intelligence, which are three of the most intelligence we believe that have a bearing on relationships. So that's kind of the background in terms of where we're coming from. And from our own experience using Bank in our personal lives and our professional lives, we're going to talk about how it has changed our understanding and appreciation of how we approach relationships, primarily because by better understanding yourself and better understanding where other people are coming from in terms of their values, it gives you greater possibilities for empathy, essentially, and compassion. And compassion is a big part of communication, which is, in terms of relationships, probably the most aspect in communications. So we're going to be talking a lot about that tonight.
That's perfect.
Anything else that you could add to that, Julie?
Well, I mean, just to kind of clarify too, a little bit extra on the personality types. I mean, a lot of what we do in relationships is a lot of times you either look for someone who is very similar to you and has similar core values. And then there's a lot of people also that look for their what's the word I'm looking for?
Their complement?
Complement, yes, thank you. Right? So something that you're least of, you look for somebody. So for example, you talked about blueprint is like stability and structure. Action is like fun and adventure. So, you could easily see like where the whole term for like opposites attract happen, where, the blueprint looks at the action and says, oh my gosh, you're so much fun. Like you always like to do different things. And then the action looks at the blueprint and says, oh my gosh, you're so stable and so structured. I'm missing that in my life. And so you see it coming together. But what happens a lot of times is that if you continue on that path and you don't try to try to meet the other person halfway, right? So the action tries to be a little bit more structured and stable, and the blueprint tries to be a little bit more action and fun. Unless you do that, those same things that attract you to a person will eventually drive you away from the person, because then that easily turns into, the blueprint saying to the action, oh my gosh, you're all over the place. You're never on time. You don't have routines. I can't handle it. Or the action says to the blueprint, oh my gosh, you're so boring. You always want to do the same things. Like you never want to try something new. So it's so important to work together in a relationship, and to try to have respect for each other. We've mentioned that, Everett, to have respect for the other person and to meet them on their grounds, right? A lot of times we communicate in a way that we want to be communicated with. We love in a way that we want to be loved, versus taking into consideration what the other person wants and the other person needs to be spoken to, and what the other person needs, how the other person needs to be loved as well. And all of those things are all encompassing and so important to make a relationship work.
Yeah, I think so. Keeping the other person in mind and being willing to compromise, and also being very, very communicative in terms of what you want, your boundaries. And a term that I've come up with recently is kind of preemptive grace. Preemptively, thinking of the other person and avoiding anything that could sort of trigger that person or trigger you that could create a conflict. So I think it's also conflict avoidance, because by truly caring for the other person, by having compassion, by knowing where they're coming from, by knowing their values, we can navigate accordingly and not create situations where there's conflict that would lead to problems. But on the importance of this, I think I'd just like to read a quote from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the president of the United States back in the 40s. And it's relevant today. He said, if civilization is to survive, we must cultivate the science of human relationships, the ability of all people of all kinds to live together in the same world at peace. And if ever there was a need for this, I mean, this has been our whole history, But if ever there was a need for this, to understand each other, to find a way to communicate so that we can establish an environment, a world that we live in peace, I think it's now. I mean, there's a sense of urgency around it now.
Yeah, I think everyone is much
Wouldn't
more
you agree?
much more aware of that need for human connection and that authentic need. I mean, the conversations come up a lot in communication in general, with all of the Zoom meetings that people are having and all of the time that you're spending, with your significant other. And you don't have your usual distractions of going places and doing different things and different activities or going on vacation. Like some of those things are have been taken away now. So there's a lot more of that quality time being spent. Hopefully quality time being spent with your close ones, which I think is why the conversation is so important now.
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of there's isolation. We're isolated from the rest of the world, but our close relationships are so much more, in your face, that you have to deal with them. If there are any issues, you can't just sort of walk away. You can't just, as you say, get distracted through other forms or other activities. You have to deal with it because it's not going away.
Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is that there's a lot of people that don't know how to communicate with each other. We're so easily distracted, or it's so easy for the day by day to just go by. You come home, you have your dinner, you're all on your phones, you're checking your email, you're watching your shows, and then you go to sleep and you start over the next day, and it's so easy to just to lose that personal touch, right? I talk a lot about this, Everett. I'm sure you're probably tired of hearing about it now, but my parents have been happily married for almost 41 years now next week. And they're kind of, to me, the epitome of what a relationship should be. And all of the observing and, that we've been doing in relationships and communication in the last few months has led me to ask them a lot of questions. And I do spend a lot of time with them. I go and have dinner with them, twice a week at least. And we do, have very in-depth conversations, and they're very open. And I even interviewed them a couple weeks ago. But one of their biggest things is after 41 years, they can still sit and have a dinner and talk for an hour, with each other and not have an issue. They can still go on trips, just the two of them, and they can still have never-ending conversations after 41 years. You really have, have really good communication skills, number one, but also really enjoy each other's company. Number two, to be able to have so many of those conversations and spend that much time with someone after so much time. And there's so many different layers of that. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just go into a couple of the tips that I've gotten from them. I'm going to stand because my chair is bothering me. One of the things that I asked them what they thought made them different than other relationships, right? And there was a couple pointers. And number one was, yes, the communication. So they've always been able to talk everything out. So even if they've ever had a conflict where, that may be a slight disagreement, or they can sense their emotions are getting into the conversations, they've learned to walk away and, kind of collect themselves. But then they come back and they talk it out, right? And I think that's a lot of things that a lot of people don't do. Is I think a lot of people are good at walking away from it, like you were saying, Everett, for avoiding conflict. I think a lot of people are good at walking away and avoiding that conflict, but I don't think enough people come back once emotions are taken away and actually talk through the issue, right? And the concerns. So if you're able to say, you know what, when you said that to me, that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and this is why, and just being able to dissect it at that moment and to go through it and to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Because then you have respect for each other and you say, okay, so I know now that bothers her or him, so I'm not going to do that again, right? Versus just assuming the other person should understand.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, I never tire of the story of your parents, because I think your parents are delightful, and that's the kind of relationship certainly that I've always aspired to as well. That kind of supportive relationship. I also had a great example from my parents, who were best friends. Life wasn't easy, but at least you knew that there was somebody there that had your back because they understood you. And I think that's really so what I got out of bank, and a better understanding, was kind of a broader perspective on myself, because I'm not just one personality. I'm actually composed of several personalities, and in certain situations I will act slightly differently. So I accommodate other people and understand other people in the same way. So I have compassion for them because I have more compassion for myself. I am not just a single way in terms of the way I handle things. So by doing that, it allows for greater tolerance, tolerance of other people's ways. And you start wondering, well, I wonder, rather than reacting or getting triggered by that, you say, well, I wonder what's really, what's really causing that person to say what they're saying or act in the way that they're acting. So, it really has given me a much broader appreciation and acceptance of myself as well as other people.
Yeah, for sure. And the way that you speak to someone and what you say or how you say it is like highly important. And in those triggers. So for example, we talked about blueprint before. So the communication tips to a blueprint would be to make sure that you stick to the facts, that you're not going to try to fluff anything or like talk anything out of proportion. You want to make sure that you're responsible in whatever you're saying, that you're not accusatory in any way, and that you're always going to tell the truth. Versus if you're talking to someone who's in action, you want to be excited, you want to be enthusiastic, you want to pay attention to them and what they're doing and what they're saying. You want to be willing to like talk loud if necessary, and then figure out like what they're passionate about and like kind of talk to them about that. So, I mean, in just those two codes, you could see the difference of like the way that you talk. So in one situation, like if you're talking, straight facts and too structured, like that might come off the wrong way to an action who much prefers to be talked to, energetically, let's say, right? So, I mean, that makes a huge difference. Versus a nurturer, you want to talk, like in warm tones. You want to make them feel like that they really truly understand that like you care and you're listening to them. So you have to know who the other person is in order to really understand like the best way to communicate with them to avoid those triggers, to avoid those conflicts, and to be heard, right? To really come across and make sure that what you're trying to say is what they're actually hearing.
Yeah, and you raise a good point there. I mean, there's people in general want to be acknowledged. They want to be listened to, and I think active listening as within a relationship, especially a romantic relationship, is so important, because it's a way to learn about your partner, but also demonstrates your appreciation, and it allows you to keep your eyes out for any sort of relationship problems that otherwise, if you're sort of blind to them, it could be a blind spot, and then it sort of comes and surprises you at the worst possible moment, usually, situations like that. So I think it's really important, when we can't emphasize enough, communication and how important that is, especially in romantic relationships. For
sure. And then speaking of which, to understand and appreciate, then there's also the love languages to consider, right? So, and I might get these wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. But so there's different.
I've got the book here in case you need to. Perfect.
So again, we are not experts, but this is all things that we've learned about and that we're considering, and that it's all that we find very highly important in all aspects of this. But so in a love language is basically like how you prefer to be loved. Not prefer, maybe how you need to be loved, right? What love means to you. And so there are there's 5 different love languages. So you could be someone who needs physical touch to be shown love. You could do quality time, acts of service, gifts, and words of affirmation. I think I remember that.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. And it comes, it comes down to how our preference in terms of giving and getting. It's a two-way street, and you got to acknowledge that the other person doesn't necessarily give or wants to get in the same way that you do. And so in that way, it's very much a language. We have to adapt. In the same way, with bank is a language. We adapt. We use a different terminology, or as you say, different precision if necessary. If that's the type of person that we're dealing with, we're much more concise and much more accurate in the way that we communicate. So you've got to take that all in consideration, and it's part of the social contract. I mean, if you want to have relationship, effectiveness, if you want to call it that way, there is kind of a social contract that you need to abide by.
For sure. I mean, and just think about how many conflicts that could be causing now if you don't know your partner's love language, for example. Say I'm physical touch, and say I'm with someone who is or gift. I forget what the actual terminology is, but who prefers to receive gifts to show love. So if I'm acting in the way that I want to be loved, where I'm using physical touch, but that's not the way that they perceive love, they need the gifts. And then you could see the conflict where, the other person would be like, do they really care about me? Like what is it that we're doing? Like, where are we going? Like, are we getting along versus like someone, or the opposite, like if I was a gift giver and the other person is physical touch, and you're not getting that physical touch because that's what, then you start questioning the love and what you need. But all it takes is just that understanding to know what the other person needs, and then to have that reciprocal motion. So then I know that I can give gifts or acts of service or words of affirmation or quality time to the other person, whatever they need. And in turn, then they would give me like the physical touch that I need, right? So it's mutual respect, mutual understanding, and having empathy for that other person, being able to step into their shoes and treat them the way that they are designed to be treated, right? Designed to be spoken to, and designed to be understood. Yeah.
I think the other important point to make here is that we don't always act out of love. There's 2 emotions that we act out of. Love is the ideal, that's where we want to be, but there's also fear. We act out of fear, and oftentimes that plays into relationships, particularly romantic relationships where we're feeling vulnerable, where we're fearing rejection, we're fearing disapproval, we're fearing abandonment, or we're thinking that we're unworthy of love, and so we do things to sort of reject it or to push it away. And I've certainly seen this in my own life, in my own romantic relationships, but I've also seen it with my clients in my coaching practice, where this is a huge obstacle in relationships. This is it's incredibly detrimental to our ability to relate when we're coming from a place of fear. And that's why it's so important to identify that and to work through whatever the issues are that you have that are creating this fear. This fear of inadequacy or unworthiness or whatever it is that you feel, because that is essentially blocking you from relating, effectively, and nurturing and developing, close relationships, because essentially you're keeping the world at bay out of fear and out of you're worried that there maybe somebody's going to have a bad impression of you or think of you a certain way, and all these things that come into our minds. So that's the flip side of it. I think is dealing with fear.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I wonder if that's what stops. I've heard and I've seen so many couples that you could tell are unhappy. And I always wonder, like, why stay unhappy? Like, why not? I understand there's sometimes situations where you can't leave, right? But if you can't leave, then why not choose to make the best of it, right? Versus like choosing to be in that negativity of like wanting to go, but you can't go. But I wonder if most of that is from fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, from starting over again. That probably has a big play with it. But then also the other side of fear, I think, is, and I've told you my new theory that that everyone will love you on a good day. Like, we can all find someone that we like on their good days, but it's the ones that, like that quote you sent me earlier today, the ones that like will hold and pick you back up from like a bad day and still hold you tight and still support you. Like, that's where relationships like really, really, really shine, is when you have someone that can take you on your bad days and on your good days. But I think that's part of the thing, is that people put up that front of like all good days because of fear that the person that they're with isn't going to like them on their bad day. Prove of them.
And that's that's really the reality of life. I mean, there are going to be bad days, and there are going to be times when you're not, the shining example of virtue, the sort of the paragon of virtue. So, ideally, you're with someone who's going to accept you on the bad days. And I'll read that meme because it was so good. The best place in the world is in the arms of someone who will not only hold you at your best, but will pick you up and hug you tight at your weakest moments. And knowing that, having that confidence in someone else to be that kind of support for you, it's invaluable. In a relationship, it really makes a difference.
For sure. And I think that's also part of why you hear so many stories too of like best friends turning into romantic relationships, because you have your best friends that have seen you on your worst days, and they've seen you on your best days, and there's still love like all around. So it's like that kind of relationship that you need in order to make it last. Because I haven't been in a very long relationships. Hi, Sharon. She just chimed in the comments. But I haven't been in a lot of long-term relationships, but I have seen many, many short-term relationships where, the first couple of months are great, and then all of a sudden, like the realness kicks in, right? Like, so all the front disappears, and all of the bad days come forward up front. And I think that's always tough, because you've learned to like certain attributes about a person in a certain way. And I never understood why people put up this front. Like, again, if I can't handle you on your bad days, then this is never going to work. You can't be an actor like our entire relationship. That's just not logical, right? So I never understood why people are not just, I'm like an open book. I am what I am. I am how I am, like, and that's not going to change from now till then. I can become more empathetic. I can become more aware of the other person, and to meet in the middle. But who I am at my core, like, that doesn't change.
Well, I mean, and I can speak from a little bit of experience on my part. I mean, I've had, 3 significant, relationships that lasted on average 10 years. So I've had, and what I can say is that we kind of fall into patterns. We fall into patterns, and I can only speak for myself. I'm not saying that this is generalized, but you fall into patterns, and you kind of, you accept a way. You may start taking things for granted within the relationship, and just kind of the way life, the life goes, So I think it's kind of human nature to do that, and you have to sort of step back. You have to sort of take that step back and say, okay, what's happening here, and what is it? What is my part in this? if there is any sort of discord that's happening. So what am I doing to cause this or contribute to this discord? And what can I do to try to help, avoid that in future situations? So I think it's a combination of mindfulness, awareness, consciousness, but also being willing to take action to sort of break out of that pattern, because we do fall into patterns. We fall into behavioral patterns, which then after it feels like it's impossible to unlock.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And then the other part of that would be to take that same consideration into working as a unit, right? As a team.
Right.
Versus
right.
like blaming the other person or blaming a certain situation, to consider that as like working together for the stability of the unit.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to look at it. It's a sense of sort of mutual understanding and mutual sacrifice, for the sake of the couple, for the better relationship.
Yeah, and we talked about this earlier today too, but about there's a lot of couples that have almost like separate lives, right? You start to the woman has her friends and her activities and her outings, and then the husband has his friends, his activities, and his outings, and then it starts to happen more and more, and they start to spend less and less time together, which obviously then helps like the separation or the
what I would call drifting apart. You just kind of drift apart. Yeah. And I've experienced that. I've experienced that one as well. Yeah. So, I think it is. I mean, and so based on the importance that you place and the value, how vigilant you are in terms of, making sure that things are not going south. And if they do go south, try to, rectify it as quickly as possible and not just sort of let it go. Because that's another thing. It's just sort of like, oh, well, what does it matter kind of thing. If you don't care, I mean, it really is a slippery slope once you start going down it. So those are some really good points. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things too is to know as much about your partner as early on as possible. I think helps as well too, right? To make sure you have similar goals. It could be like generalized, right? In life, your similar goals, your similar values. I know my parents did a marriage counseling, a pre-marriage counseling that I think is so highly valuable, because it was literally asking up front, like face to face, like, hey, what do you like? What do you not like? What do you want out of life? Like, what does this relationship look like for you in like 5 years and 10 years and 15 years? Like, what do you want this to be? What do you not want it to be? And just kind of like laying it all on the table, because then as early on as that happens, and I think that you're able to make the conscious decision of either like accepting it and be like, I'm fine. Like, I like your answers. Like, we can work with this, and go and move forward. Or you can decide at the moment, like, what, like, this is not something that I can deal with. Like, before we go into this for 20 years of misery, let's end it now, which hopefully wouldn't work. But I think it also puts in the back of your mind, like throughout the relationship, it's that confidence, right? Like, if I know you like breakfast in bed every Sunday, for example, then like, how easy is it for me to make breakfast in bed every Sunday? You know what I mean? Like, to know that. But if I don't know that, then I can't make that happen. Right? So I think that's super important, is understanding all of those things up front. And for people to stop, thinking that their partner should just know. Like, of course, we've all read the romance novels, and we all wish someone would, just be able to read our minds and know exactly what we want. But just speak it out loud, people. Just tell the person what you want and make it happen. It's as simple as that.
Right. Rather than, I mean, a lot of times what happens in the way, especially, when we're involved with, sort of modern technology and communication as we have it today, it's easy to feel ignored. It's easy to feel insecure because you're not getting all the attention. And that your partner has other sort of digital relationships as well as your primary relationship that may be interfering in terms of their time that they spend or have available for you. So there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes as well.
I saw there was a video probably a couple of years ago now made by Prince EA, and he had talked about like forgiveness, like sometimes when we're triggered because like we don't get that morning wake up text, or, we don't get the kiss goodbye at the door, but those are things that we expect, right? So you're disappointed in your expectations versus like actually having spoken them out loud and asked for those things, be like, hey, I would really like to hear from you in the morning, or I would really love like a kiss before you leave. Unless you speak those things out loud, a lot of times I think we get upset and angry over things that, like you've said, triggers either from the past, like a past relationship, or something that we expect the person to just know because why not? Like we're all psychic. And that they're not doing, and to be upset more with that. We're solving world problems now, Everett.
You raise a really good point. And I've seen it in my own life as well as people that I've worked with, my clients, is the sort of the emotional baggage that we carry around, and how that triggers so much of the conflicts that we have. And if we had sort of just dealt with it to begin with, or found a way to to be aware of it, at least, because awareness is kind of the first step, right? But to be aware of it and to have and to be open about that, be honest about that, at least in terms of your communication. This happened to me, and this is why I'm reacting the way that I'm reacting, just to get it out, to put it out, because oftentimes with fear comes the emotion also of shame, that you may not be proud of a situation previously in your life, and the emotion that this current situation is bringing up within you is actually reminding you of a situation that that caused you a great deal of emotional pain and anguish, and you're sort of reliving that emotion through this experience, and that can only lead to problems. I mean, there's no good ending to that story.
Right. And I think we're that because we're high K as well. So we're high knowledge. So our heart and our mind is always in conflict between what feels right and what makes logical sense. Right. So you go back and forth, and you battle it out where, like this feels like it should be right, but it doesn't make sense. Right. I've justified so many crazy things in my life. Felt right, and I ignored my brain, and my mom is always the first one to call me out on that. She's always knows, and it takes a while for me to take the blinders off, but we live and
I'm very much that way too. I mean, on the nurture side, I'm an incurable romantic, and then on the knowledge side, I'm very sort of critical and analytical, in that the two oftentimes come into conflict. I mean, I love the promise and the elation of romance, but on the other hand, I'm sort of very disillusioned when things don't work out the way I'd hoped they would be, because that's my analytical side that's at work, and my sort of like my intellectual, more critical side that looks at it.
Right.
So that it's a matter of reconciling those.
Yeah, because then we fall back under the expectations of what we assume something should be versus maybe speaking it out loud. Because I think a lot of it is, we want things to just flow and to just be perfect. I used to ask my parents all the time, like, how did you know that you were each other's, because my dad proposed like 3 months into the relationship. It was crazy. So it was always
right.
We were like, how did you know? And they were like, oh, we just know, like it's I don't know. it's hard to describe into words, but like when you have that certain expectation, unless you speak it out, it makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, you can't intellectually analyze the phenomenon of soulmates, because that really does exist. I mean, there are people that feel, that they're soulmates, that their souls have known each other, from previous lives, all that kind of stuff. And it's true. I mean, the people that feel that way believe it. So, perception is reality. So that's as true to them as whatever facts could be true to you and me.
Yeah. Yeah, that is very true. What's your biggest takeaway from the relationships that you've been in? Like, what's maybe the thing that you would have changed maybe the most?
Yeah, I think, not putting myself in a situation where I thought I knew best, I knew better, but to actually communicate, with my partner, because that, when you take, even with the best of intentions, if you take your partner out of the equation, then your partner feels undervalued by definition. They're not being consulted. They're not, and so it creates automatically. Even if, like I say, even if you have the best of intentions, it's really about communicating, what your intentions are, getting the feedback, and taking action subsequent to that discussion, as opposed to just, because in my youth I was much more action. In fact, my action was my second position. Now, thankfully, knowledge, I'm more discerning in terms of how I spend my energy and where, what actions do I take. But there was a time, when I was much more action. I just, for me, what was important was results. So I would go off on my own and do stuff that would get results. And I thought I'd be pleasing the other person, but it turns out that person felt sort of left out of the loop in terms of making a contribution, in terms of making a decision, for me to take those actions. And so I think that was really the biggest realization for me.
And it's so funny,
How
right?
about you?
Because even just knowing that, like, had you known that she needed to be included, or she wanted to be included, right? It would have been like slight changes, but like you weren't doing it like on purpose. You were just trying to get things done, right? But it's so right. Interesting how like that and like that miscommunication of what you thought she wanted, what she thought you wanted, and like the misunderstanding of it, like how that could cause the conflict.
Yeah, and then there are other fears that came into it as well. Fear of disapproval, fear of criticism, things like that. So I would just go off and do my own thing, thinking that just hoping that it would turn out for the best. But oftentimes it didn't.
And we live and we learn, right?
Yeah. Live and learn. That's it.
my biggest takeaway from the relationships that I've been in would be to that I need to see things the way they are. I tend to fall for the potential, right, versus actually like listening and being and empathetic to the other person, versus kind of like implementing like my viewpoints or my thoughts or my wishes like onto the person and seeing things that aren't there. So I think I've done a lot of that too with like my communication in general with people. I've noticed that like as much as I always thought I was a good communicator, I realized that I do still speak a lot in the way that I would want to be spoken to, versus in the way that like someone else needs to be spoken to, right? So I'm still working with that every day. I'm like at least aware of it now. I'm conscious of when I'm doing it. But I feel like I do the same thing in a relationship as well, is to and see things in my way versus the reality. So
yeah, and I think for me, Bank has cracked that wide open. I don't have to be a certain way, so there's no way I should expect someone else to be a certain way. So you're able to sort of accommodate so much more from your own self, but also, in appreciating others.
Yeah.
I think it's so important.
Exactly. And it's the emotional intelligence. Like that is just like skyrocketed with all of this. It's just because the more you understand, the better that you can connect, the better that you or the less conflict that you have, because now instead of like, oh my gosh, like why are you doing this, or acting out, or you're all over the place, now you can be like, oh, okay, so you just need that, like that energy, you need that action in order to like keep you entertained or interested or whatever the case may be. But like just being able to understand someone else's viewpoint makes a huge difference, because then it takes judgment out of it, right? So now instead of like, why are you like that? Now we understand, like, okay, now I understand why you act the way you do, or why you say the certain things, or why you get upset if I'm late, like, 5 minutes, because you like to be 15 minutes early. Those little things make a difference.
I feel so as well. Yeah. And I think, I know for a fact that I'm a better, more understanding person. I mean, and that's ultimately the measure, because now when I interact with people, there's much more, there's greater feeling, but there's also a greater understanding. And that's, rather than thinking that I have to be a certain way, and that means, being strong or however, I perceive that. But I'm much more flexible. I'm much more accommodating, and I think a more mindful person. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, and I think then the connection is more authentic as well, because you're truly listening. You're truly listening to like listen and just to be in the moment, right? To be mindful of that moment. So I think that makes a huge difference too. With the more you understand, and the more that you know, the more that you're able to just truly be and connect, which is huge. I mean, that's such a big driver for us in general, like humans in general, but as nurturers, it's like so important to just really be able to connect on that level with someone. And
I'd be interested to get some of the feedback from people that are watching this, maybe on the replay, or if they're watching it live. Because we are nurturers, so relationships are important to us. Number one. But if there are people that are of a different personality type, what does this really resonate? This kind of talk of relationships and how we are trying to improve and work on those. Is that really? Is that something that is of value, to them? And I think it would help us, to guide our conversations in the future sessions that we're going to have as well. What can have you given any thought to that? What's sort of important for friends and family and colleagues in terms of our relationships? Is there any difference between those and the values that we would want to share with our romantic interests?
A lot of similarities, obviously, right? Being able to understand the other person fully and being able to communicate effectively in the way that they need to be communicated with. I think that's like the biggest point. So we're going to continue to talk about that multiple times. Okay. But there's obviously like different things. The love languages obviously doesn't not necessarily apply to your colleagues, at least, maybe to your family and friends. So there's definitely like a conversation there, but there's, specific, tips and suggestions, especially for parenting. I mean, I could talk about that all day long, because I have learned so much just in my communication with Evan, and how that's changed just by understanding his personality type and, and having conversations accordingly. So.
Yeah. I mean, what's good about, with what's happening more and more in corporate scenarios or situations is that, people are doing, sort of personality tests. They're doing the Myers-Briggs or the Strength Finders or the DISC or any number of different personality tests, just to understand more about themselves. But what Bank does is it adds an additional sort of dimension of, of the other person, our interaction with that other person, and how we need to accommodate and adjust in order to communicate more effectively with them, so that we're sending a message that they can receive. We're speaking a language that they understand, sort of thing. So I think that's going to be important for the workplace scenario. For
sure, because then having that conversation in those language allows you to create influence, right? Whether it's with a parent and a child, or a coworker, or a sales situation or business, or a friend you're trying to convince to try something new. I mean, being able to speak in their language and relate your side, your position more effectively, will guide so many more results, especially from the influence standpoint, which is huge.
Yeah. And so using the metaphor and the analogy of language, because we're both linguists and sensitive to that, and also using the metaphor of music, being in tune, being in harmony, being able to join together in unison to make a more powerful statement of what we want to say, or the way that we want to act, or the things that we want to do, and the values that we have. I think, again, just reflecting on all of that has really helped, me to be better at understanding others and also understanding myself.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, being in tune and in harmony with others.
Yeah, very much.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
We can go on and talk more, so I don't know how much more you want to cover, if you want to wrap this up.
I think we'll wrap it up for this week, and then we'll carry on with some other inspirational ideas next week.
Perfect.
After we've had a chance to think about it.
Yeah.
Sorry, say again?
Oh, I was just going to say, for anyone that's watching this right now, if you have any questions, you're watching this on the replay, you can comment replay. That way we know when you saw us. But also feel free, ask any questions, or chime into the conversation. Give us your viewpoint. I mean, this is all our observations and things that we've learned in the last few months that we think can help other people, and it just helps us just talking it out loud, right? And just kind of having a better understanding of what it takes in order to have like a good, healthy, strong questions in the comments. If you're curious about the personality codes,
yeah,
we've been talking about, you can put the personality code in the comment, and we'll send you a link for you to take your test. Oh, my video went out for a second. I would love to hear back from you guys. Any comments, questions about relationships with family and friends, so parenting, anything like that. You have questions next, and
or any
last words of wisdom, Everett?
Yeah, and just in the comments, if people could include any subjects that they'd like to tackle with us in the future, any other things that they're particularly interested in that we could maybe discuss on future installments of this program, that would be great. No, I've really enjoyed it. I already look forward to next week. So thank you very much, Julie, for hosting this. It's always a pleasure, and I always feel enriched by our conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It always is. We can talk for days. Now we're just going to share with everyone. All right. Have a lovely evening. Care. You too. And we'll see everybody else next week. Have a good night.
Yes. Thank you. Good night.